Okay, hello and welcome to the Virtual Agile meetup. I forgot where I was at that point in time, but welcome and thank you so much for joining. I know that we have had a little bit of a swap around, so thank you to the guys that have joined us today. It's really, really good to see you and good to see some new faces as well. Today is quite an exciting session and one that we've had on our minds for quite some time. You guys, after our meetup, we always ask for feedback. And one of the things that keeps coming up is community of practice, distributed community of practices. How do we make them good? What are we doing? Is it worth it? And all the questions kind of in between that. So I'm really, really excited to have Emily Webber with us today to be able to share some of her thoughts, ideas, and knowledge on the subject. So before we move on, it is never too late when you haven't seen people to say Happy New Year. So Happy New Year, guys. And if you're watching this in July, same to you if we haven't met. Excellent. Moving on. A little bit of admin for the call. So in terms of questions, if you want to pop your questions in the chat, that would be great. Or ask your questions at the end. There will be time at the end for Q&A, so please hold up for there. Write down your questions. But we've lost the ability to gather pre-questions because we're not on the same platform. So do jot them down. This is being recorded. You hopefully should know that because it's in the pre-notes. So if you don't want to be recorded, then please switch off your cameras. Otherwise, put your cameras on, and we'd love to see your lovely smiling faces or other. Time box for today's session. It's 9 minutes past the hour and we go to the top of the hour. So always get this wrong, but I think that is 51 minutes left. We are super tight on our time because quite frankly, it's important to me. There's no other reason why. And what else? Chat. We love we like people to have a chat in between. If you've got something interesting or you know something sparks a bit of a memory or I don't know, a link that you've read before or anything, pop it in the chat as long as it's relevant, obviously. And it'd be great to hear what other people think as well. So please use the chat. What else have I missed? Fire escapes. Fire escapes are in your house, wherever that is. For me, it is straightforward. Turn right again. Remember not to let the cat out and then just run really far. For everybody else, just follow your own. Okay, so because we are a bit tight on time, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip our rock, paper, scissors session. But if you are interested in what that's about and how to use it in your agile teams, gosh, this sounds like a sales pitch. It's not meant to be. Then go ahead and watch some of our other recordings, which are at Virtual Agile on YouTube. So learning is the engine of practice, and practice is the history of that learning. Found this little quote, but it was quite interesting. From Wegner Trainer, sorry, I was trying to work out how to say their name. So I thought that was really good. But before we delay this anymore, I'm going to introduce Emily to us. Now, Emily Webber is joining us here today. She has done multiple different things, one of those things being writing a fantastic book. She's also known internationally for her work in communities of practice and really the best person for us to be speaking on this subject. One of the reasons Emily is here is because she was highly recommended by Bob Gallen for community of practices. And he said, although I don't know Emily personally, I am connected and I follow her work and I'm really interested. And, you know, we've had Bob on here before and I highly rate Bob. So thank you so much, Emily, for joining us. And we'll hand over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. I will just grab my slides, which are there. So you should be able to see those. So hello. I got a lot of slides. We haven't got a lot of time. I'm gonna run through a bunch of these, see how it goes. So today, we're talk about communities of practice and forming meaningful connections in a distributed environment. So my name is Emily Webber. I'm an organisational consultant and communities of practice expert. My focus is on creating environments where people can thrive so that organisations can thrive. So that includes things like organisational structures, learning and development, career framework, ways of working, growing practices, and joining up people through communities of practice, which I think is really important for any organisation. It's been so important. Before we were as distributed as we are now, and it continues to be even more so. Um, I have been bringing people together into communities for many years, and I really believe that we're stronger together. This is my kind of bit of cred slide. On the left is a whole bunch of organisations that I've worked with over the years, including government digital service. There's a lot of government organisations on there. There's some private sector organisations. There's a couple on there that are one's in India, one's in Peru. So worked with a bunch, but the ones on the right I think is worth calling out as well. So these are my work adjacent communities, I would say. So I often bringing people together because that's what I like to do. So there's a collection of meetups there, like Agile and Ether, which is an online meetup that I run. I've been running since 2018. Liverpool Digital People was when I moved to Merseyside a couple of years ago. I didn't know anyone, so I thought I would create a meetup so I could meet like-minded people because I'm not working in any offices around, and a couple more, including a community forum. And Helen already mentioned there's a book that I wrote in 2016 called Building Successful Communities of Practice, which built on a lot of my experience working at government digital service as the head of Agile delivery. So there's some interesting stuff in there. I've got more, it's almost 10 years ago now, so I've got more approaches, tips and tricks and things that I've learned since then. And one day I really will write the second version of that. So before I talk too much about communities of practice, I wanted to talk about meaningful connections, because talk about meaningful connections and work friends. So we can think about meaningful connections as mutual trust, interest, mutual respect, trust, interest, positive regard, and making the other person feel valued. And we can think about work friends, and you might think about some of your work friends. So that those people that are really important to us that we, I don't know, just natter with or have some time out with or bounce ideas off, that really, really important thing. So we inherently know that is important, but why should companies care about meaningful connections? And this is my, I guess, a bit of a like sales pitch to organizations if ever you need to tell them to explain why these kind of connections between people are important. So the first is this quote here. This is from an organizational consultant called Margaret Heffernan. If you don't know, she's written a whole bunch of books. She's brilliant. She has a talk called Forget the Pecking Order at Work, and she says that companies don't have ideas, only people do, and what motivates people are the bonds and loyalty and trust they develop between each other. So those meaningful connections. This is a quote from a blog post called The Power of Work Friends by John Clifton on HBR. And he says, workplace friends are more committed, communicate better, and encourage each other better. And my third kind of sales pitch for meaningful connections is there's this book called The Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker. And he says the people who survive stress the best are the ones who actually increase their social investments in the middle of stress, which is the opposite of what most of us do. So 3 reasons there why we need those meaningful connections and work friends. They help motivate us, they help us innovate, help us communicate, and they help us be more resilient. So then why do I go into organizations and hear things like this? So this is a quote from somebody. I was doing some research in an organization looking into how well their communities of practice were working or not working. So they are they've always been distributed because they're multi-location. They're over quite a number of locations. And I was talking to people to understand what their connection to their community was like. And somebody said this. They said they felt really isolated, and it just made me feel really sad because it was like this we shouldn't be this. We need this. We need these connections. This person feels isolated, which means they probably feel demotivated, which means they're not giving their best. Um, so yeah, that's not very good. And there's some interesting research called this is No Employee in Ireland, Workplace Loneliness and Job Performance. And this research used the UCL loneliness scale, which it's got 28 questions in it. And if you read it, it sounds really, it's like some of the questions are really, I guess, hard hitting. It talks about whether people feel left out, if they have someone they can turn to, if they have interests that's shared with others, that kind of thing. So they surveyed 672 employees across 143 work groups and their supervisors, and they looked at people that felt lonely or not connected and how well they performed. And well, the graph is here. It showed that people that didn't feel connected just didn't do so well. There's an article in Sloan Review that looked at this that suggested some of those reasons that people might feel lonely was things like there was fluid composition, so teams move around and then people don't spend time with the same people, or modularized roles where people feel interchangeable, or people are part-time on teams and they're moving around, or they're just short time on teams. So they don't get much time to spend with the same people. That happens a lot in organizations. One thing that I think, we'll come to community, one thing that you can think about a community of practice in an organization is almost like a home family. Like you might belong to a community of practice of like-minded people that you get to build those connections with. And then even when people move around teams, they still stay connected to this bunch of people, which is their community of practice. Okay, so I will talk about community. And I like to say that you can't have community without unity. So I hear lots of people talk about communities of practice when sometimes they mean groups of people or networks. For me, some of the real essence of communities of practice is community, which is the unity, which is having a sense of community where people feel like they belong to something, they can influence it, they have a shared history, and it's meeting some of their needs. So I think this is fundamental to any community. So Alex Pentland, who's a professor at MIT, he wrote a book called Social Physics, which I haven't got the link here, but I'm sure Ines will find it or Helen will find it. He did lots of research into how people talk to each other in organizations and who talks to who, and essentially found out organizations where people don't talk to each other across silos don't do as well as organizations where people do talk to each other. And he said human communities can develop a sort of collective intelligence that's greater than the members' individual intelligence. And you think about any community is bigger than the sum of its parts, because you get the opportunity to collaborate with each other, which means you can build on top of each other's ideas and create something that is bigger. So together we can do amazing things. This photo, actually, this is a photo of a community of practice that I worked with in India, and they were doing writing a kind of press release about their community, or they were going into the future and talking about what their community has achieved. And look how happy they looked. It was just like, it was a wonderful moment. So I often ask people this question as well. You can think about it here. Feel free to put stuff in the chat. Often when I'm running workshops, I ask people what value they get from connecting with people who have the same passions as them. So I've asked this question of lots of people, lots of different locations, lots of different roles, different places around the world. And what is, I guess, really heartening is that people say the same stuff. I have a slide here that just has some of the things that people say. So it says things like learning and solving problems together and feedback, getting inspired. I think what's interesting on this slide is that I think half of this slide is software engineers in Bristol and half of it is designers in Peru. And it doesn't matter where they are, people fundamentally know they get value out of connecting with people that care about the same thing as they do, as we all do. And we tend to gravitate towards doing that anyway. We are really wired to connect with other people. Those meaningful connections are really important to us. We find them anyway. I always think that are if you're in an organization where some of that isn't happening already, there's something else, there's some other problem going on. Although I think it's harder when we're distributed for you to kind of gravitate towards those people. So communities of practice, this is how I talk about them. So communities of practice are shared groups of people, and there's connected through a shared passion for something they do and collectively improve as they interact regularly. And there's a couple of important points that are in here. I would just say, I think it's worth saying that the term communities of practice was coined in the 90s, and Etienne Wenger, who's now Wenger trainer, was one of those people that coined that. So that's the quote that you had earlier. Helen was referring to Etienne Wenger, now Wenger trainer. And so this phrase here, so really importantly, is connected. So communities need to have connection. I think there's no community without community. Otherwise, they're just a group of people. Having a shared passion, so something they care about, that caring about something really connects people. Something they do, so if it's a community of practice, it's a community around something people practice. There are other communities as well, communities of interest, communities of place, other things, but this communities of practice is around something they do. Collectively improving is the learning, so people are learning together, raising the capability as the practice as a whole, and interacting regularly, so regular chances to meet as a group, with additional chances, and this is really important, additional chances for members to meet in other ways, either individually or in smaller groups, communicating through messaging tools and that kind of thing. I do have sometimes when I say to people, you don't have to all just meet all together all the time. They're like, really? Like we can meet differently. So that is really crucial part of it. And people say sorry, I'm going to different slide than I was going to do, than I thought it was. So I illustrate it in this way. You might be a person who's on a team. You might be the only person on a team that does a particular role. So say this person is a designer and they are with lots of other different roles on their team. And there may be lots of other teams that also have designers on them, but when you're working on a multidisciplinary team, particularly if you're distributed or if people are doing kind of timeshare office things right now, you generally only see your team, you don't necessarily see anyone else. And this can create a bit of silos between those people. Sometimes we put programs around these teams and it creates more silos. Maybe the person on the left and the person in the next team spend time talking to each other about where their work overlaps, but they're not sharing across everybody else. So communities of practice join these people up through informal, non-hierarchical, voluntary, connected, long-lived and cross-cutting communities of practice. So these people getting a chance to get together, to talk to each other, to interact in this way, in a group of people that doesn't really have an end date, it kind of continues. So it's a little bit different from a team. And I hear people say wonderful things. I often ask people to give feedback on their communities. So people giving, insightful and emotionally supportive, people to bounce ideas off and explore new ideas, and they take their better selves to work and really making impact on the confidence and capability of us all. When I hear that stuff from people that I've helped grow their communities of practice, it's like, it just makes it all worthwhile. It's like people have, they feel great about it. So carrying on with the theme of communities of practice, I'm going to talk to you about the 5 benefits of communities of practice that I use. And those are so fundamental, and I think I've talked about this quite a bit now, is that is this support network, right? So communities of practice, they support people through peer-to-peer connections, giving people confidence and motivation to excel. We feel much better about what we're doing when we've got other people around us that have similar passions, similar concerns, care about the same stuff as us, and we can bounce ideas off of. It can be quite hard when someone is the only person practicing or doing a particular role on their team when they don't necessarily have anyone else to say, is this right? Is this not right? It gives us real kind of confidence and motivation when we do. I hear people say things like this, so that we all support each other and any one of us could do what we could to help another member of the community. The person that said this to me, and this was a few years ago, I think they were at the point where they weren't sure they wanted to be at the organisation anymore. And when we set up community of practice, they really felt like they had support in a way that they never did before. So you can cultivate that and you can create support networks by finding opportunities for people to build trust through regular meetings and other interactions. As I said before, that opportunities for people to meet one-to-one basis to really build those meaningful connections is really important. So even though we're distributed, finding ways for people to, you can do one-on-one. I'll talk a bit about this in a minute, but finding ways for people to talk to each other, or small teams or small groups of people to work on specific things can really help build those support networks. And when you have that supportive network as a foundation, the other stuff kind of comes on top of it and you get all the other benefits too. So the second benefit I wanted to talk about was growing capability. So communities of practice grow capability by accelerating individual learning and raising kind of collective skills of the organization. And I think it can support in lots of different ways, from more structured learning, like schemes of work, courses, pathways, formal training that can be done as a group. Things like deliberate practice, which is trying stuff out in a safe space. And a community practice can be a really great safe space, focused on specific skills. Like I always find trying out facilitation, for example, in a friendly group before you take it out and try it out on a client, or user researchers trying out interviewing techniques, or developers have coding cartas, that kind of thing. And then through to more unstructured stuff like discussion and problem sharing and talking through ideas. There's I like to think about when you have a community of practice, taking time to look inside and outside. So inside is exploring your situation, your role in your organization. So solving problems, maybe community improvement, supporting each other, that kind of stuff, but also kind of expanding possibilities and looking outside, doing things like watching talks together, lots of talks recorded that you can watch together, deliberate practice, or kind of visiting other organizations and finding ways to kind of expand your knowledge that isn't rooted in your day to day, because we can get quite blinkered in that. So you can grow capability by finding time to share ideas and challenges, learning through existing content, deliberate practice and feedback. So the third benefit of communities of practice is around bridging knowledge. So communities of practice bridge knowledge by joining up people, ideas, knowledge, and related work to reduce gaps and silos. This becomes really important when we're distributed, because we don't necessarily see people or see other work that's going on. So finding ways to join up people across those teams or across those programs helps to join up knowledge, it joins up related work, reduces silos. So often, this was a quote from someone from a product management community a while ago. And I've seen this a lot with product managers. I think product managers are just super busy and they don't get to kind of raise their head up very often. And when I get the opportunity to bring a bunch into a room together, they're like, oh, we're doing the same thing. We're working on something. We have dependencies with each other. And actually they can start joining up immediately. Um, I was once working in an organization where there was an iOS development team, and I heard they'd spent a week trying to fix our work on a resizing problem. They couldn't. It took them a week, the whole team a week to fix it. Only later on, when we started joining people up in a community, did they find out that another team that worked in the same building had previously fixed that problem. So they spent a whole week fixing a thing that, had they been talking to each other, they could have just said, "Oh, here's the solution," and we just save a whole bunch of time. Um, so joining people up in that way is really important. I've also done, I don't get to do this very often, but it's quite interesting to do social graphs of how information and knowledge flows around the system. So this was a bunch of people that were in the same practice, in the same profession. And I wanted to see who asked who questions, who went to that, the kind of the big dot on the right hand side is the person who everyone went to ask questions. And the orange lines are lines of communication. The thicker they are, the more they happen. And it's really interesting to see that stuff kind of gets stuck in certain places. So you get this silos of knowledge, information, and expertise, and stuff doesn't kind of flow around as much. So joining people up becomes really important. So you can bridge knowledge by, I think it's really great for communities to just, people in communities to just share what they're working on. Just do like kind of show and tells, and people start to kind of spark and say, oh, I'm doing something similar. Asking questions, sharing answers, and connecting through things like forums and messaging platforms. So the next one is that communities of practice scale approaches, and they allow the sharing and spreading of good practice across organizations to create consistency. I was going to change this slide out, but it's now it's an old one. And we often see organizations, communities do great things like create design systems or things that other people in their communities can use. So doing that as a community of practice because they're the people that use it so often. So this is Atlassian using their design language to create something that everyone can use. But what tends to happen with communities is that people share good practice, and they tend to learn from each other, and they take that and they try that out elsewhere. So it helps kind of scale approaches without being top down. It scales it through networks in a really kind of effective and way that people actually want to take it forward. So scaling approaches, and you can do this through sharing approaches to your work, creating space to discuss them and apply them in different, and how you might apply them in different scenarios. And the fifth benefit of communities of practice is that they create opportunities. This should say, sorry, create opportunities for collaboration. So they facilitate, I shouldn't say improve practices. Anyway, they facilitate the opportunity for collaboration. So it raises standard and quality. So when you do have a bunch of people that do have meaningful connections and support each other, they will start to find things that aren't working for them or aren't working for everyone, and they will start to work on things to make them better. So allowing communities practice can create the space for that to happen. What I often find is that sometimes people think, oh, we've got the community, let's give them a bunch of things that they should work on. And that doesn't really work because it is a voluntary, non-hierarchical thing. It's not another team to give work to, but when people do connect and they care about something, they will create things, they will make things better, they will create tools for everybody to use. So I've got a couple of examples here, and these start to be really beneficial to organisations. So at Ministry of Justice, there's some Agile training that the Agile community of practice created that could deliver Agile awareness training across their different agencies, but it came from them and they were delivering it. I always find when you go into an organisation and you're an external person, you don't quite have the context of that organisation, and so they were creating something that was much more situationally aware. This here is the HM Land Registry and how they got together to create a joined up capability plan for people that within this is in the design community of practice to look at what they needed to learn and how they could learn together and how they could teach each other and really benefit from people in that community. And there's lots of other things out there. There's lots of examples of an example a while back from a bank. I can't remember which bank it was now, whose agile community created a agile transformation plan for the organization. And so lots of things come from kind of improving practices and collaboration by sharing challenges, identifying commonalities, and looking for opportunities to make improvements. So whistle stop tour through those. So the 5 benefits of communities of practice that I like to talk about: supporting people, really, really fundamental to everything; growing capability, bridging knowledge, scaling approaches, and improving practices. And when I ask people what value they get from connecting with people that do the same thing as them, it falls into all of these categories, which is where a lot of this comes from. So I have talked a bit about meaningful connections. I've given you a very whistle-stop tour about communities of practice and the value that they bring. I wanted to talk a bit about distributed communities of practice. Some of this refers to distributed any groups of people, but I have my community of practice hat on. I do think with all of this, I think communities of practice are really fundamental to bringing people together that don't see each other, because we just don't see each other as much anymore. So it really kind of gives that opportunity for people to connect, even though we're not necessarily in the office or in the office at the same time. I called this section as well, "Can you form meaningful connections over Zoom?" And this picture, which isn't one of mine, it's just one that I found on the internet. I looked at that and I was like, that's a very specific type of meeting there. That's a very broadcast meeting. And actually, a lot of the time we'll join a meeting like that and half the people have their cameras off. If you're ever on a Teams call, you have that circle with the initials in it, and you're like, oh God, somebody turn their camera off. So if your community of practice sessions are like this, and I do see people do this, they say we'll have a monthly session and everyone gets on it and somebody will talk and everyone will listen. Then I would say the answer is no. You can't form meaningful connections in that way, but I do believe you can form meaningful connections over Zoom. And I particularly do this with my online meetup, which also has an associated community around it. And I've seen the connections that people make there that it's just really amazing to see. It's like people that have not necessarily ever been physically in the same room before. Just ended up, they've ended up being friends or they've ended up working in each other's organizations. It's brilliant. We used to have this idea that you needed, and this is often the argument for people going back in the office, like you need to be able to bump into people like a building. It's either a quote from Steve Jobs or someone at Pixar, and I was trying to check today. I'm not sure, one of those two. I said if a building doesn't encourage unplanned encounters, you'll lose a lot of innovation and magic that's sparked by serendipity. And serendipity is that kind of thing where you create the opportunities for stuff to happen because you bump into people. So it might be through random conversations, or it might be some kind of ideas being sparked. What I would say is that if we don't encourage unplanned encounters, then we'll lose that innovation and magic that's sparked by serendipity. So there's a term that I pinched off a blog post called Assisted Serendipity, Fostering Peer-to-Peer Connections in Your Organization by a guy called John Gula from Etsy. And this is about creating the space and opportunities where serendipity could happen. So we need to work harder at those when we're not in the same physical space, because we're not passing people in the corridor in the same way, or we're not waiting outside a meeting room having a chat like maybe we did in the past. So there's a couple of things that I like to do, particularly with distributed communities. First is random coffee. I love a random coffee. They can be hard to get off the ground, but this is getting randomly pairing people who have signed up to take part in random coffee and saying you got half an hour, just meet up and chat about whatever you like. And this example here is from Michigan, University of Michigan, and they said it was like giving people permission to talk to strangers. Like you can just go up, you're paired up so you can have a chat with each other. And it really kind of opens up stuff and opportunities, or you just have a chat about something that isn't work, and it's just a great chance to meet someone that later on you might meet again, and at that point you've already met them. So that really just helps build connections, and within a community, it's a really great thing to do. Here's some people from my community, from Agile and Ether, doing random coffee. So we always do selfies, and just give people the chance to chat, who might be in completely different locations, no agenda, just try stuff out. And there's a great tool called Donut, for Slack that helps you create random coffees. I also like to find ways for people to form meaningful connections that aren't necessarily looking at a video call. So I have a channel in my Slack group called Daily Outside Photo. There's a blog post I wrote about that here, which was first of all to try and get people to get out of the house during lockdown, but it was you just share a picture. We just share pictures of where we are, and just kind of gives people a bit more connection. It's like to their lives. It can be really important as well to spend some time together. Automatic, who have been a distributed organization since they started in 2005, I think, and they have this kind of every 12 to 18 months, they work all over the world. They get together in one big get together. So they get together for a week somewhere in the world. They work on projects, take classes, and share meals, which creates bonds that influence people all year long. So sometimes, even if you're, just getting together once a year and spending some quality time with people, they get together for 7 days, but it gives them a great opportunity to just build those connections that go into kind of continue those relationships and meaningful connections whilst people are online, and kind of continues to help people feel connected to other people. Just and I just wanted to touch on a couple of other ideas just to help continue kind of building connection with people. So, and this can happen with communities of practice, can happen elsewhere as well. There's a great thing about eating together. Eating together there's a lot of kind of anthropological stuff about, there's a word called commensality, which means eating together, which helps build trust and connections between folks. Having group time with people. So I often find communities want to work on stuff. Getting people to work together in pairs or even in triads, in threes, is a really good thing. So they can go off. Three is good because it means if one person is available, then the other two people can still work. And creating those smaller groups, they can bring stuff back to the community. Having time for play, walking together or walking calls is really good. Random coffee, things like buddies, so pairing people up so they've got someone to talk to is really important, or can be really important as well, just to kind of continue to build those connections. So I think the big thing is communities of practice are really valuable in our distributed environments, but we also need to find ways to make sure our communities of practice feel connected to each other and create meaningful connections within those, which helps those meaningful connections across the organization. I am just going to finish now on my favorite slide, my favorite Venn diagram. So I can say here's a like sad beaver playing a guitar and duck playing a keyboard, but the real magic happens when we connect with each other, when we overlap. It's like we are bigger than the sum of our parts. Those meaningful connections are both really important to us, to individuals, and to the organization as a whole, and they make things better for everybody. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Emily. I also love that last slide. I did take a screenshot. What a brilliant example. Um, cool. So I know that we are a fairly small group this today, so I don't think we have any questions that have come up, but it was just so interesting in terms of like what you were talking about in the community, and I particularly found I'm going to be a bit contradictory now, but in terms of eating together, the one thing that I do at work is avoid eating with people because I actually it's like my only time of peace. But
Mhm.
I might take that for 2025 and say, actually, if I'm going to go into the office, maybe I should take that opportunity to eat with people. Um, yeah, so that is interesting. I haven't heard around bonding as well around that. So um, yeah, so and also I really like the call out around the Slack and the donut and the coffees. I'm a big fan of random coffees too. In fact, I made some really good connections at my last role with people all over the business, just having random coffees. And the funny thing is that once you have that random coffee, even if you're just literally reaching out to someone completely random, it's often, like you say, a really nice conversation. And it doesn't feel weird. It only feels weird like pre-call, but on the call, it's like quite
I think
exciting.
it's that connecting. So, like, I've been in organizations as well they where I might just say, look, let's just talk about communities, and all communities are good, and they don't have to be work-based. So one place I worked had a flower arranging club, um,
Mm.
and they got to do flower arranging. They enjoyed it, but it meant that those people knew each other, and then it made work easier. So because then if they had to work together, they knew each other. It's much easier to work with people that you have met before or know in some capacity or have some trust with, than
Yeah.
just kind of cold. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
oh, sorry, go on. Yeah.
no,
Oh,
please. Otherwise, I have a question.
oh no, I was just going to say I have a motto of having fun whilst getting stuff done, completely down that route of people seem to work so much better together if you have fun together, which also is alongside that sort of connections and doing stuff that may be different or outside of work or just enjoying your time. I mean, we spend way too much time at work not to enjoy it. I have a neighbor who's like, why do we even call it work? What, can we not just enjoy what we do? And I was like, that is tough, but I get what you mean. Sorry, Ines, over to you.
No, I just wonder. I think in general terms, people do appreciate the benefits of what communities of practice, so even communities. And I mean, Casey can tell us about the Trailblazer community, how across the world we sort of like managed to sync in so many different topics. But in your experience, what are the things, maybe patterns that have come as resistance or difficulty or how to make it sustainable? Is even that a thing to look for? Maybe it's okay that things sort of emerge and goes away. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think it's hard. I'm gonna see if I've got a slide hidden away in you can see my whole screen in here somewhere. Um I don't think I've got it. Um oh, here you go. So a couple of things. Community of practice will, I'm just going to put that there if you can see that. This talks about the stages of a community of practice. And there's a real thing. So first of all, I think it's worth saying there's a real thing when a community first forms, people get really excited about it. And then you often get this dip in energy where people are like, oh, okay, well, I've got I was really excited about it, but now I'm kind of going back to real life. And this bit here can be quite hard for people to continue to push through and get through. Um, that doesn't answer your question, but I will we'll come back to it. I think that's worth just saying that dip happens and that's normal. So if you're in if you've got a community and you think, oh, it was going really well, and now it isn't, that's really normal, and it's just you just carry on. You just carry on and it's okay. But I work a lot with communities of practice within organizations, and there can be a real kind of challenge between delivering stuff and deadlines and spending time doing things that feel a bit more like creating sustainable organizations which communities of practice can help do. So there can it can be that sometimes people don't feel that they are allowed to take part in something that isn't deliver the specific work that's in front of me, versus doing something that's like learning and and connecting with other people. So that can be a challenge in that kind of environment. Communities of practice, I think, often live and die on the people that are running them. So some people are really good, and I think it's good to have a group of people doing that, but some people are really good at encouraging people and getting people motivated and together. And other people, sometimes when people leave a community, and they've been really integral to that, either other people will step into that role or they might just step back and the whole thing kind of collapses, and that can be a challenge. I find there's a difference. I think there can be a difference between opt-in communities, like the one I run, the Agile and the Ether community that I run. It's like people have chosen to be there versus it's in their organization. So that can be different. But also, I find that people move in and out of communities depending on what's going on for them. So if they're in the position where they're like, oh, I need more people around me and I need more support, they might take more of an active role in a community. And if they feel that maybe they don't need that, they might kind of, or they get super busy, they might back off. So you get this ebb and flow of things as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, some patterns there, and then things to bear in mind as well. I think probably you have some like common guardrails. What I've found sometimes in community of practice within organizations is trying to tie up what could flourish from a community of practice to what perhaps other layers of the organization may attempt to demand for outcomes and so on. But I don't know if you have any thoughts, but
I think that's it. If an organization puts too much pressure on a community to deliver stuff against the organization's goals, then that can really kill it, because then it just becomes another job. I'm just trying to find one other slide which I cannot find. I will just talk about it. So there's some research done in the 80s that looked at sense of community. And it talks about a number of things. So it talks about being clear about membership. It talks about people being able to have influence over the community, if they're part of it. It talks about kind of shared history and those meaningful connections, and fulfillment of needs. And it's a really useful thing to think about those things when you're building a community, which is, if we want a sense of community, then we need to consider this stuff. So that helps us think about who is invited, how we make that clear, what are some of those kind of, how do people engage with it, how do we make sure that it meets people's needs, and how do we make sure people influence it, and those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you. I don't know if you got any follow-up, with no more follow-up questions, Ines or Casey? No?
I was just excited to hear other people talking about this. Like, I've tried like cold calling. I call it my like cold call network on LinkedIn, where I just like message other people in my community that I don't know and try and like connect with them and have a virtual coffee date. I do want to get that going in my organization more though. So this is exciting. Like even the picture day, I think like we just don't talk to each other very often because we're a completely virtual team. So lots of goodies. Yeah. Thank you.
One thing I encourage people to do in the random coffee. So we have a random coffee channel on Slack, and then people join that, and it means that if they're in it, then they get paired up with Donut. One thing I get people to do is share the selfies, and say, oh, we talked about these things really, really high level. just to get a bit of FOMO going. It's like, oh, that sounded like a really interesting conversation. Maybe I want to do one of those next time.
Yeah, I think it is hard to get the interest. Like people want to do it, but we're always so busy. Like we talked at the beginning, the back-to-back meetings. It's so hard to find the time. So getting that interest, and I think it is so important. Like whenever I talk to people, I'm always like, "Oh, I didn't know you were working on that project." Actually, my project interacts with that. So I do think it's important. Just so hard to get that interest.
Yeah, it's like getting people to talk to each other. I once got a bunch of, I think we got 5 product managers in a room, and it turned out 3 of them were building basically the same thing.
Oh dear. Well, on that high, or on that crazy level, we shall call it a day. Thank you again, Emily, for joining us. It was really, really interesting to hear about those 5 top tips, or 5 top sort of commonalities for us to be able to take back to our organisations, and hopefully to enable us and our communities to thrive in the future. So keep on going. If you're feeling that dip, be strong, and it's well worth the effort. That's one of my big takeaways. But thank you so much for your time, and good morning, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are.
Thanks, folks.
All right, adios.